Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation, Commissioner Burns. My name is Rob Thornton. I'm going to talk to you about microgrids. Let's see if I can figure this out. Here we go. First, I'm going to step back a little bit, talk about some transition we see in the national electricity market. What is a microgrid? What are the attributes of it? Some case examples of operating systems, and then why build a microgrid? Why is this technology taking shape? And then a fairly large deck. I won't go through every slide, but some of the emerging policy issues I think as a commission you're going to need to contend with, now and in the near future. A little bit about IDA. We're now in our 105th year. We started operations in 1909. We're a nonprofit trade association based outside of Boston, have about 2,000 members in 26 countries, including NRG Thermal that operates the downtown district cooling system here in Phoenix. So what's happening in the electric industry? The DOE has realized that really the grid that built by our grandfathers is really no longer sufficient for the future. The typical coal-fired power plant only has an operating efficiency of about 32%. Two-thirds of the fuel that goes into the plant is lost as heat. It's basically exhausted. So when you look at the efficiency of our current central station power generation, it's at 32%, which is really where it was when Eisenhower was president. And we can do better. But it hasn't really moved very much. This is a complicated chart, but it shows you that this is sort of the overall energy flow in the U.S. A lot of energy is used to produce electricity, but only about a third of it really gets to the end user. A more simplified look is here. This is just the energy used to produce electricity in the U.S. 40 gigawatts is consumed to make electricity, yet only 13 gigawatts is delivered as useful energy. And so when we look at a typical central station power plant, it looks a lot like this. Two-thirds of the fuel is being exhausted into the sky or the ocean or the lake or the river. And this is really, there are some solutions to this. A lot of other countries put that heat in a pipe and use it to heat their cities. Scandinavia, the UK, all across Europe where energy prices have been higher historically, they don't waste the heat, they put it to use. And so they have power plants that operate at efficiencies of over 90%. And these are multi-fuel power plants. And as a result, they have a better economy, lower emissions, and a lot of advantages. And so we see this trend happening in the U.S., a movement from centralized generation to more distributed generation, microgrids. And in the UK, basically, they're recovering the heat now in their existing power plants. But in the U.S., we actually have a lot of district energy systems being deployed. But fundamentally, there's a paradigm shift happening in the U.S. electricity market. In 2012, 165 new power stations were built, about 8,100 megawatts. Of the 165, 105 of them were under 25 megawatts, mostly renewable, landfill gas, solar, wind, driven by renewable portfolio standards. So this shift is happening. And the emergence of district energy and combined heat and power microgrids is really a result of a request, a demand for greater resiliency. My predecessor from the utility recognized that reliability and resiliency are really becoming primary movers. And he also mentioned that employers moving into a location want to have access to clean energy that's highly reliable. So if you're trying to cite the next Google or high quality employer, they're concerned now not only about the source and reliability of their power, but how efficient and how clean is it. So we're seeing mayors looking for deployment of microgrids. They want to use local energy resources like biomass if it's available. And some folks are using district energy microgrid as part of their climate adaptation strategy. So microgrids are really the result of some trends that are occurring, globally. So what is a microgrid? The first presenter covered this, I think, pretty well. It's really an asset that combines retail load and energy generation. But the hallmarks of it are energy management, and it has a smart interface. But when we think about a microgrid at IDA, we think at its core, it should have a highly efficient generating source, one that doesn't waste the heat, one that produces heat and cooling as well. So at its asset base, it has combined heat and power or district energy. So it's providing heating and cooling to the local grid as well as power. And then you can integrate a variety of different fuels, different resources into this microgrid. Utilities are actually today doing a very good job in terms of reliability. In the U.S., the reliability of the electricity grid is excellent. And what do utilities provide? Obviously, kilowatt hours and infrastructure to deliver the energy. And they also have a diversity of fuel sources, lots of generating assets, capacity planning, diverse assets under management, and some of the other components that they take care of, voltage stability, waveform, all of the other components that are sort of the mystery of electricity. But microgrids can do this too. They can produce high efficiency electricity, kilowatt hours. And when you locate the generating station closer to the load, you can actually reduce congestion and the cost of delivering that electricity. And then when you have heating and cooling as a component, you can actually change the demand and load shape on the grid, integrating thermal resources. So you actually have a more resilient, reliable grid because you've taken some of the load off the grid. I'll show you more on that in a moment. And then with the microgrid, you can actually have more base load. And the gentleman from APS mentioned that these have to be reliable, dispatchable assets. Ultimately, they can produce lower costs for all customers. But what the microgrids also provide, now you have more diversity. It's not just a central station plant 100 miles away on a long wire to the center city. You've got a diversity of fuel sources. Essentially, more assets, more diverse, and they're planned for local critical loads. Again, reflecting back on the APS presentation, you saw that some of the early adopters are people that frankly need 5 nines or 6 nines of reliable power. They don't feel it's adequate to rely on the commercial electric grid for highly reliable energy. And they can integrate thermal energy and redundancy. So microgrids can actually strengthen the reliability of the grid and also provide these voltage, frequency services that are so paramount to electricity supply. Simple concept. You just have a local generator serving the local demands, and it's operating. Most microgrids, frankly, are going to be running in parallel with the grid, not islanding, not separate, but working in conjunction with the grid most of the time. Microgrids can add now reliability by integrating a variety of sources: solar, fuel cells, PV, batteries, flywheels, all of these technologies that become economic when you have them scaled up to serve multiple users. They may not be economical on an individual end user building by building basis. When they're integrated into a larger microgrid and those capital costs are being spread over dozens of users, then frankly, they can enter the marketplace. And essentially, grid reliability is enhanced because you've got a variety of generators that can respond to different conditions. So why build a microgrid? If you're an owner, generally the first reason why do you want a microgrid is reliability. Most of the microgrids in operation today were really driven by cost reduction, savings, efficiency. And some are part of, on an institution, we see our universities who have made climate action plan, they've used CHP, district energy, as the fundamental resource to reduce their carbon emissions. But the independent system operator, they get a reduction in locational marginal costs, increased supply capacity, transmission needs are mitigated, and marginal losses can be mitigated. What really becomes valuable about these assets is that they can rapidly respond to change in operation. If you have a PV farm and a cloud bank rolls over, that source can drop off fairly quickly. With a microgrid, it can adapt very rapidly and respond to intermittent assets much more effectively. And essentially, they're spinning reserve. That is critical to reliable operation. The local economy now has a more resilient grid. Business interruption risks, I'll cover more on this in a moment, are now very costly. The insurance industry last year recorded over $120 billion in losses due to grid interruption, weather-related, in the U.S. It's now a real cost facing balance sheet and liability. And then, of course, if you have an event like an ice storm or a hurricane or a snow or local fire, you need an area of refuge. And a microgrid can provide a place not only for citizens but first responders. And we've seen that happen. The local electric utility benefits really by shifting their peak load. They're not having to buy the most expensive power from the grid. Now, there are some cautions. The local electric utility may perceive a loss of revenue and the interconnection issues and the balancing of these assets. I think these are real issues that we can discuss and explore further. But when we have a multi-building microgrid, in effect, it's a challenge, I think, for a commission to understand what is this new animal. Because it's not just a demand response. It really is a unique class of grid resource. And frankly, we need to have them better understood so that they're fully compensated for the value that they produce. Energy and auxiliary services, reliability and availability, and their ability to balance intermittent renewables. And I think as commissions, right now there are some hurdles to deploying microgrids. Selling power across the right-of-way, multiple properties, even of the same customer. Those are issues that are being addressed, and I'll cover what's happening in some states on that. And the current utility business model, frankly, doesn't make it easy for utilities to adopt these because essentially they erode revenue. While it might be beneficial for all of the parties I mentioned earlier, I think we have to get through some regulatory traps to really deploy these. What we've seen, though, the MUSH market, municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals have been deploying microgrids. They're a new term, but not a new technology. University of Texas, Austin has been running a microgrid for 90 years. They produce 137 megawatts on campus. There's 71,000 people on this campus. And they have tremendous reliability. And the reason they have a microgrid is because they also have a huge research component on their campus. They cannot withstand any interruption, both power as well as heating and cooling. But what's interesting about UT Austin, they've made a significant investment, not just in microgrid, but in efficiency. And so now the campus today is twice as large as it was 25 years ago, 18 million square feet. Yet today, they're using the same amount of fuel as they did when the campus was only 7 million square feet. All of that growth has been carbon neutral and paid for through efficiency. So microgrids really work in terms of delivering economic value. TECO, which is the Thermal Energy Corporation at the Houston Medical Center, the largest healthcare campus in the world, just under 19 million square feet. If it were a city, it'd be the 10th largest city in Texas. It's actually larger than Houston. This photo, the city of Houston in the background. But again, $1.2 billion of research flows through that business every year. So reliable energy is paramount. Last year, or 2 years ago, more than now 2 years ago, they just deployed 48 megawatts of generation on the campus. It has had a dramatic impact on their emissions. But the ERCOT grid, you may be aware, has a tremendous cost for peak capacity. In fact, last year it was $9,000 a megawatt hour. So TECO is not buying that expensive capacity. They're not essentially exposed to the fuel and demand risks from the grid. Where we've seen essentially microgrids sort of stepping forward was recently with Superstorm Sandy. Largest storm, frankly, 820 miles in diameter, larger than 2 hurricanes combined, affected 21 states, 106 people killed. Over 8 million homes without power, took 57,000 workers to restore the grid, and the costs to date were over $71 billion in losses. This was a massive storm in the Northeast. It affected, largely New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. But what's interesting is the assets that kind of stood up to Sandy were these district energy CHP microgrids. Nassau County maintained operations. Hospital with microgrid stayed online. Hartford Hospital stayed online. A wastewater treatment plant, which frankly is a sort of underappreciated asset, stayed online. When the pumps stop working at a wastewater treatment plant, you incur tremendous exposure, cost, and risk. And you got to keep those pumps running. The College of New Jersey stayed online. Their combined heat and power plant, they were able to island and maintained operations, while really all around them, the power was down. Fairfield University, where my wife went to school, 98% of the town was without power. They migrated the students back onto campus, and it was an area of refuge, not only for the students, but the citizens. And the Co-op City, which is really a city within a city, just outside of Manhattan in the Bronx, 60,000 residents. It's one of the largest housing cooperatives in the world. They have a 40-megawatt cogen plant. During the Sandy, they supplied power to Con Ed and maintained operations. But really the system that kind of stood up and I think has become the hallmark is Princeton University. Do we have a Princeton grad in the audience?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Go Tigers. So Princeton, has a microgrid that is able to island. And they withstood not only Sandy, but Irene, and the lights stayed on. And this is, again, a mission-critical operation. So Princeton actually has, a couple of microgrids. They buy power from the local utility, and in fact today, with their microgrid, they buy more power today than they used to, even with their own generation. But they buy the least expensive power. So what they do at Princeton is they buy electricity and they buy natural gas, they have fuel oil for backup, and biodiesel. They can actually run their turbines on biodiesel if they chose to. And they make heating, cooling, and power, for the entire campus. So if this were just a conventional, jet engine, turbine, it'd be producing producing power at about 33%. But because they recover the heat at Princeton and use it to make chilled water as well as heat to the campus, they're operating at efficiencies of nearly 85%. Sorry, it's a little slow. So when you look at what their simple cycle gas turbine is, efficiency, 38, 37%. By recovering the heat, they're now getting, 80, 85% of the use of the fuel they consume for the campus. And the chilled water plant, essentially, they use steam to make chilled water. Let me just back up a little. And then, and also electricity. And the chilled water essentially acts as a battery for their electric load. And this is not a Princeton building, but essentially what happens when a building is on a district cooling loop, the orange is the peak demand in the building. The green is their before chilled water. Green is after district cooling. If you're an electric utility, this orange part is the bad cholesterol. That's the expensive power. And the green is really the type of load you want in all your buildings. So district cooling essentially provides tremendous benefit to the grid. And Princeton, really, they just respond to whatever the price in the grid is. They've implemented a very, I think, sort of sophisticated command control scheme. It integrates all of the price signals. They're able to dispatch effectively. And so when and this is just a chart to show you, so Princeton doesn't buy power when the price is high. They make their own. When the price is low, they buy it. It sounds simple, but they've been able to really produce tremendous savings. They also have on campus a 5.4 megawatt PV farm. Nice slice of real estate. And here's what their load looks like. So the green and the purple are the power they're buying from the grid. And the blue is the power that they're making, and the red is the power that their PV farm is making. So let's look at it another way. This is the power that they're buying from the grid on an August day. So in effect, what Princeton has done in a design day, in August in Princeton, which is sort of a typical day here in Phoenix, 100 degrees, they had a design load on the grid of 27 megawatts. After this new scheme, they've now reduced their peak demand to 2 megawatts. So you say, good for Princeton, go Tigers. In fact, now there's 25 megawatts available in the wires that are now for the local economy. So they've really taken load off the grid. I'm going to try to move quickly through these last. So microgrids, are essentially, a generating source, parallel or islanding, can operate in either mode. I just would like to stress that microgrids are not backup generation assets. These need to be robust 24/7 assets. And when you integrate combined heat and power, you can get efficiencies of 80 plus efficiency. They can integrate renewables, and then the energy management strategies produce a lot of other benefits. Of course, islanding is the thing now that microgrids are becoming, I think, more recognized for. So when the grid is down. But they can also, as APS mentioned, be the right resource for congested areas, provide load following, and fundamentally can make the grid more competitive. They may be the least cost asset that can be deployed. But, this is not for the faint of heart. You should not be, wading into a microgrid unless you have the capabilities, the awareness, and the ability to manage and optimize these assets. Fundamentally, I think, too, we're going to see movement towards microgrids when the assets become, more bankable will require that they be both robust for critical assets but also competitive. So the policy issues we're facing as an industry, we'd like for commissions to better appreciate what microgrids can do for the benefit of the local grid, for the local economy, and see better transparency and pricing for some of these attributes. Microgrids largely are buying power on a retail level and selling it at a wholesale level. I think that there could be some, better conditions there. And some pricing signal for reliability. Some premium might be associated with reliability. And as the grid business model shifts, I think microgrids are going to be deployed, Commissioner, as you asked earlier, by private sector players, independent agents like universities and Google, as well as the utilities. And we're agnostic as to who does it. We just think that these assets need to be better understood really within a regulatory scheme, so that market restrictions, rights of way, are reasonably adjusted, reasonably removed, strengthen the grid and regional emissions. Now, New Jersey, they recorded business losses of $21 million due to grid interruption last year. So microgrids are not just an electricity issue, and we think that private capital will move quickly, and already is moving into this sector, as we can demonstrate strong returns. So I put this deck together more for your consumption after my remarks, because I think these are issues that you'll be grappling with, and I think you're trying to uncover. And there's some resources that we can make available to help you as you sort of navigate this process, because there are challenges, and because microgrids are neither transmission nor pure generation. And they should be, I think, considered more effectively in integrated resource planning. And fundamentally, microgrids today are not looking for a free ride from the distribution utility. They're recognizing that the cost of being parallel with the grid and paying for access to the wires needs to be, fully appreciated and understood. And what we've seen right now, because of some of the restrictions, regulatory restrictions, the adopters have been host systems like universities, research campuses, pharma, and others. And when you look ahead at what needs to happen for the utilities, in order for them to, I think, embrace microgrids, whether it's decoupling or some other mechanism, they shouldn't take it on the chin because someone else is competing with them for power necessarily. But there should be, I think, a better competitive framework for these assets to be deployed and coexist. Because when we link microgrids in communities, then we actually end up with a more resilient energy profile. And it's going to take some effort. Again, finally, reasonable tariffs, some integrated reliability planning. And what we're seeing, frankly, is mayors and CEOs want microgrids. They're saying, we want what Princeton has. How can you help us get there? And I think the questions are really going to be coming to commissions as to how to navigate, the process forward, because the market is beginning to demand access to more resilient, cleaner, reliable power. So fundamentally, the microgrid industry is looking for really 4 key things: equitable access, evolution of the grid paradigm, so there's more distributed resources, better transparency and economic fairness, and then rules of the road that de-risk these investments and I think will enable easier capital flow. Some states, mostly the sandy states, have been addressing this. Massachusetts has now been put in place some, I think, effective policies. New Jersey has a cogeneration law that allows a cogenerator to wheel power if their buildings are connected thermally. New York, you may have seen recently, came out with a very robust new plan for electricity in their state, essentially calling for more distributed generation. Connecticut has deployed microgrid. They've provided funding to launch 9 new microgrids, and an additional 20 are underway. And Maryland also is addressing resiliency through microgrids. So the governors and the mayors are looking for more resilient electricity infrastructure, and they're turning to microgrids as that resource. So my final remarks are, when you think of a microgrid, I would ask, it's not just electricity. Thermal energy needs to be fully considered. We've got these technologies that are proven. This is not new technology. It really is deployment. Not backup systems. These are robust assets. The key will be transparency and parity for access. Largely, they're not technology issues. Commissioner Burns, you mentioned earlier about the varying technologies. And they're going to take shape according to the characteristics of the local needs. So again, one size does not fit all. These are a variety of schemes. But mayors and first responders are looking for a more resilient grid, and it's important, I think, for economic growth. So thank you so much for your attention. Happy to take any questions. And I've also put together some additional resources for you. I actually was invited here on behalf of the Southwest, the Department of Energy Southwest Technical Assistance Partnership, and there's some material. So my offer to you, as you continue through this path, we'd be happy to help you explore it further. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. You referenced in here the cost of the outages, basically from the 2 big storms, recent storms. Is there any historical tracking of cost of outages over a longer period of time? I mean, these were kind of special storms, the superstorms.
Yeah, there has been some reporting done by both McKinsey and Lloyd's, and there has been some analysis of the trends in interruption and the impact of grid-related interruption. So there is some work on that.
Okay, and the interruptions that you're pointing out here has been weather-driven interruptions.
Largely
what about
weather.
others? Is there others as well, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of forms of weather, not just hurricanes. In Maryland, it was a Derico, high wind caused major outage. Parts of Connecticut were without power for over 2 weeks from a tornado. Mm-hmm. So it's been really a variety of storms, not just hurricanes.
It's a variety of weather.
Correct. Variety of weather
events. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's weather related. There are also some studies on cyber and terrorism. Some of those things. But there are definitely the underwriters, the insurance companies have been looking at and have analyzed weather related grid outages.
Okay, and then the other thing that you talked about here was the efficiency and the difference between here and in Europe, I believe you referred to, and the capture of the heat as opposed to just heat loss. I mean, that's a sort of a design feature. That's something that typically gets built in on the front, or is this something that's fitted, or?
It's both.
Both?
It's both. So you have... there are about 800 district energy systems in the U.S. today. Some are combined heat and power, so they're making electricity as well as heat and cooling. A lot of our universities have a central plant with an underground piping network to provide steam, hot water, and chilled water. So they expand over time. Some are legacy, and we're there. In the U.S., we've had 40 new downtown district cooling systems built since 1990. So these are retrofits in cities as well as Phoenix. So Phoenix, when you're building the ballpark, the county was building the ballpark, they were going to install 9,000 tons of cooling capacity for 82 home games. They said, why don't we use the other 283 days, why don't we use that as part of a district cooling network? Instead of having that capital sit idle, let's integrate it into a larger network of district cooling. And that expanded over time. So now there are 4 district cooling plants in downtown Phoenix making ice at night. So when the cost of power is lower, they melt the ice during the day and they distribute chilled water to air condition all the buildings. And that's been built since 1998. So in Europe, it's much more pervasive, but it's actually quite pervasive here in the U.S. Most Edison utility systems, when they started operation, were combined heat and power. They sold the heat as well as the power. So it's really nothing new. It's just, it's just, frankly, not as appreciated in the U.S.
Okay. Questions? Yes.
Do you happen to know the payback time period for the investment in the Princeton microgrid?
You know, it's not really, it wasn't an investment based on payback. You know, it was really driven by efficiency. And that plant has been operating for a number of years. So they added cogeneration, I think, in 1996. I think at the time it had about a 7-year, return on investment. Since then, though, they've done other things. For instance, they have a heat recovery in their stack. Costs them $3 million. Saves them 30,000 metric tons of carbon a year. Their PV farm, on the other hand, costs them $30 million and saves less carbon per year. So the efficiency of these systems, energy efficiency with these central plants, is actually the highest payback assets. It's not, I can't really give you like an all-inclusive analysis of the Princeton system, but I know when they did the cogeneration aspect, because it was already heating and cooling, they added cogeneration, it had kind of a 7-year, but I think that's actually improved. Today, the price of gas is pretty low, and so it actually is a double-edged sword. When you have low-cost gas, your savings now become less. So when you make an efficiency investment in a low-cost gas, your amortization and savings gets extended. In a time of high-priced gas, your efficiency gains are higher. So there's this, if you have a district energy system, if you have a gas turbine, you're actually getting the benefit of lower-priced gas. Trying to initiate a new one becomes, frankly, somewhat challenging because the spark spread, isn't really where you need it to be. I gave you a long answer, but Princeton, they've got some pretty smart people there. A lot of investment bankers. It's turned out to be a good investment for them.